The views and opinions expressed in The Fact Is with Hollis Grant are those of Hollis Grant and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Droids Canada Network. Droids Canada Network does not take responsibility for any content or position produced by Hollis Grant and his show. Listener discretion is advised.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of The Fact Is. I'm your host, Hollis Grant. And on this week's episode, we are talking about none other than my friends, Doug Ford. And why are we talking about Doug Ford? Well, there's two things that have come recently to light in Ontario, in Canada, which I might add is the highest sub-sovereign state in the world with the highest debt. But Doug Ford was elected 4 years ago on a platform to reduce government spending, reduce that deficit, only to add billions to it. But the reason why we're going to be talking about Doug Ford is not because of his expense, not because of his party or his MPs that like to write off $1 worth of expenses from a dollar store. That you can listen to that episode on droidscanada.com. Go back, take a look, and have a listen and have a laugh at all the incredible expenses that Doug Ford's party has submitted for you, the taxpayer, to pick up. But we're going to be talking about his poll numbers. Now, there's two events that happened. One, we had the event of the poll numbers came out, and two, there was a snowstorm most recently, a very bad snowstorm, which saw about 2 feet of snow in most of the region, most of Ontario, which is the highest demographic area of the province, where the majority of voters are. Now, this particular article is taken from January 17th. And this is from CTV News, and I'll read this particular article by Chris Fox. So, 1 in 3 Ontarians approve of the job Doug Ford is doing months away from election poll finds. Premier Doug Ford's approval rating has dropped to the lowest level of his entire tenure, as with the provincial election now less than 5 months away, a new poll suggests. The Angus Reid Institute poll of 1,081 adults in Ontario found that only 30% approve of the job Ford is doing as Premier, compared to 67% who disapprove. The Premier's approval rating is down about 6 points from October, when 36% of respondents supported the job he was doing. Ford tended to poll better among older Ontarians, aged 55 and up, where he had a 52% approval rating. But his approval rating plunged to just 26% among those aged 18 to 34 and 38% among those aged 35 to 54. Among individuals who voted for the federal Conservative Party in the most recent election, Ford's popularity was only lukewarm, with a narrow majority of those people approving of the job he is doing. It's 51%. Ford's handling of the pandemic was also similarly polarizing, with nearly 7 out of 10 respondents believing he has done either a bad job, so that's 31%, or a very bad job, 37%. About 6% of the responders said that Ford was doing a very good job handling COVID-19, and 23% said he was doing a good job. Ontario delayed the reopening of schools by 2 weeks after the winter break, continuing a pattern of closures that are wearing on the province's parents. Children in Ontario have spent more time in online school throughout the pandemic than other students across the country, as parents express a desire for a more balanced approach, leaning towards keeping schools open for in-class learning. Meanwhile, business owners and workers are upset with renewed restrictions on indoor dining, gyms, theaters, and large events, and healthcare workers are dealing with surging hospitalization once again, Angus Reid said in a release accompanying the poll results. All of this likely influences the negative assessment Ontarians offer Ford on his handling of the pandemic. The Angus Reid poll found that nearly 2/3 of respondents, 65%, think that Ford's government has done a good job with the vaccine rollout, but 73% of those polled said that the Premier has done either a poor or very poor job of making rapid antigen tests available. The Ontario results, which came in the wake of the abrupt resignation of Minister of Long-Term Care Rod Phillips, are part of a wider Angus Reid poll quizzing residents coast to coast on the performance of their premiers in their handling of COVID-19 pandemic. Ford had the third lowest approval rating in the poll, but was ahead of Alberta's Jason Kenney, 26%, and Manitoba's Heather Stephenson at 21%. Speaking with CP24 earlier on Monday, Ford said he doesn't look at the polls, but believes that a return to Liberal rule would be an absolute disaster for this province. We spent the last close to 4 years fixing all the problems that we faced when we went into office, he said. It's very simple. Who do you trust with your money? Do you trust the PC government that has shown that we got ourselves out of the hole we inherit, or do you want to go backwards again? The Angus Reid survey was conducted using an online panel between January 7th and 12th. It's considered accurate to within 2 percentage points, 19 out of 20 times. But if we're just going to look at what Doug Ford has said about getting out of the hole that we inherited, so the debt, how much has the debt increased? Well, the Conservatives have been in power. Now, going back to how much the Doug Ford government has added to the debt, there's an article from 2019 from the Financial Post. It was quoting the Fraser Institute, and it was estimated that the Doug Ford government was adding $42 billion to the debt. Now, they don't plan to balance the budget until 2023. Now, this was an article and a report that was done prior to COVID. Now, how much money was added during COVID? That amount hasn't been totaled yet. And there is no amount that has been totaled. So when you're talking about how much that this Ontario government has reduced the debt, no, it hasn't. Yes, there was COVID in the way, and that will be the angle at which that this particular government will seek its re-election, saying COVID was in the way, we had to do this emergency spending. Look how great we were, and handing out how many billions of dollars to all of Ontarians to make sure that you were safe. But they're going to hide the fact that all that additional was added to. So this government failed to do what it promised to do, which was to balance the budget. It did not happen. It simply did not happen. Now, there was two incidences that we talked about. So one, the poll numbers, and second was the snowstorm. Now, what did Doug Ford do? So the snowstorm occurred January 17th. And Doug Ford decides that as there's a state of emergency, I guess we could say an essential travel order, everyone stay inside. Well, when there's 2 feet of snow, cars aren't going anywhere. Everybody was just sitting at home doing nothing. But we had people trying to get out and go to work on that Monday morning. And what does Doug Ford do? He hops into his oversized SUV, gets on the phone, and starts FaceTiming local news stations while he's driving. Now, Ontario has a rule that you cannot use your phone at all. You can't touch it if you're operating the vehicle. So, one, how did the phone call get answered? And two, should he not be setting an example and just looking at the road when there's really bad conditions? Now, most of the streets weren't plowed in the early morning, so here he is driving around his constituents in Etobicoke, digging out people. Now, it might be a nice thing to do. Sure, it's a very wonderful thing to do. But maybe you should do that without the cameras, without having interviews from place to place where you're going. And if COVID was such a problem, why did the Premier not wear a mask while he was shoveling out strangers outside? Heavy breathing would be a cause of concern. The more that you breathe, the more moisture particles are coming out of your mouth, and that you can contaminate somebody. Now, somebody like Doug Ford, who is obese, should not be doing that type of work. He was wheezing during all of his interviews and constantly out of breath. This man is out of shape, and he should not be doing that type of work. I was surprised that he didn't have a heart attack. But more importantly, I'm surprised that this premier would drive under distracted driving when he's setting an example up for the people, that he's helping people in his community with his PR team at the same time that these poll numbers were reported to the press. This was not an act of generosity. This was nothing but a terrible PR stunt. This is nothing more than submitting a claim for $1 to the taxpayers of Ontario to pick up the tab. And as we get closer to election time, we got less than 5 months to go, there will be more and more stories of these types of politicians, career politicians, trying to manipulate people to vote for them. I'd like to thank you for tuning in to another edition of The Fact Is, and by all means, take a look at our past episodes on droidcanada.com. You have yourself a great week.
Dan, what happens every Thursday?
That would be DCR Droids Canada Radio.
And what time is it out on Thursday?
That's from 9 till 11 p.m.
Dumb question, where do you find it?
You find that at accessradio.ca.
And what's the best part?
It's